Hi guys, in this video we're going to discuss about mine squares. So what are mine squares? Mine squares are a pair of squares with reciprocal zugzwang. Might be a bit confusing. Let's just demonstrate it. It will be easier to understand. So here there are two mine squares here, which is this one and this one. This is from the point of view of white, by the way. So white moves that way and black moves that way. Now if white king is to move, and let's say white king moves to c4, which is actually the wrong move, then black can move to b6 and basically put the white king at zugzwang, because, well, no matter what the white moves, then black would be able to capture this pawn. This is the only square where the white king can guard the white pawn at b5, because obviously this pawn is guarding this square. Well, this square doesn't even guard that pawn actually, but I mean this square. And now white king has to move. Anywhere he moves, the black king will just gobble up that pawn. However, now if you think that now if you assume that it's black is to move, now black is in zugzwang because black can only guard this pawn here with the king at b6, but now the black king has to move. So if black moves anywhere else, black cannot move here because obviously this pawn is guarding that squares. Then black will lose that pawn and white will win. So reciprocal zugzwang. So this original position we're looking at is actually a draw because again there are two mine squares, which is this one and this one, for black and white respectively. And if each of the players know this concept, then both of them will just avoid these squares and there is no way to proceed. Let's say it's white to move, then white will be waiting for black to step into the landmine, the mine squares, and white will just avoid his own mine squares. But black, knowing the same thing, will do the same thing. So it will just be the king dancing around the mine squares without getting into it. They will just wait until their opponent get into it first. But obviously, if the opponent know what he's doing, then yeah, no one will step into the mine squares, and this is draw because there is no way to proceed. For example, another idea maybe is for white to take this to go here and take this. Well, obviously you cannot go here. Let me reset the arrow to go to square f5 and target this pawn, or for black to do the same thing, target this pawn. But yeah, they are too far away. So if white moves closer to the g5 pawn, then black will just gobble up this pawn. Same thing with black. If black moves to g4 pawn for white's g4 pawn, then white will just gobble up this pawn. There is no way to proceed. There will be a dance of the king around the mine squares, but this is a draw if both players know what they're doing. Okay, now let's look at different positions that still illustrate the concept of mine squares. First, can you guess where are the mine squares in this position? White goes that way and black goes that way, by the way, just in case it's confusing. We're looking from the point of view of white in this study. And you're right, this is the mine square. These are the mine squares, I should say. There are a couple of them. And why are these mine squares? Well, again, just to illustrate, it's white to move. If white moves to the mine squares and black moves to the mine squares, then black can induce zugzwang on white. So in this position, there are reciprocal zugzwang. If it's white to move, then white would lose. If it's black to move, then black would lose because white has to step away from the mine squares if white's to move, and black would be able to gobble the pawn. Same thing with black. Okay, let's return to the original position. You might think that this is a draw as previously, but it's actually not, because here white has neat little trick. Here in this position, can you see how white can possibly induce black to step into the landmines? So yes, you're right. White can induce black to step into the landmine by sort of dancing around his own landmine, but trying to attack this pawn, if that makes sense. Let's just illustrate it. So first, king f6. So we're trying to attack this pawn now. And well, black can do several things. Let's say black moves to king c7, then black gets into zugzwang again. So black knows he cannot move to c7, but he needs to defend this pawn somehow. So now the other alternative besides king c7 is king c5, because well, if you go to, let's say, king b5, then it's too late, right? It's too late. Ultimately, you have to step into king c5 anyway. But again, these are the mine squares. Remember the concept. So what happens when black steps into the mine squares? Then white needs to step into the corresponding mine squares and induce a zugzwang on the black king. Now black has to move. And no matter where black moves, he cannot move here. Ideally, he wants to move there to still guard the pawn, but he cannot. So he has to move away, step away from the pawn. And white is now winning. These are the key squares for pawns on the 5th rank. If this is not clear, watch my previous video. And if white controls one of these 3 key squares, then white is winning. So white is winning here. The pawn will promote. Okay, now same position as before, but it's black to move. Well, black can utilize the technique that we just saw actually to grab this pawn, but this time it will be a draw because white will be in time to stop black getting to the key squares. Let's play it out. So again, black tried to attack the white pawn, but keep in mind the key squares, the mine squares I should say, don't step on it. So how to attack it without stepping on the mine squares? Well, king b5. Now white has few choices. I mean, obviously you can go to king e6 if white doesn't know the concept of mine squares, but then king c5 will just win this pawn and white is totally lost. So what should do instead, knowing that he cannot stop black from taking this pawn, is to just give it away. First try to defend it by king e4, then black of course go to king c5, and now white is in zugzwang. Ideally want to move here to keep defending this pawn, but obviously this pawn guard that square, so white has to give away the square and the pawn. Important here is not to move to king d3, because after the black king takes d5, then the black king will have opposition against the white king, and the white king has to give way, and then the black king will be able to secure one of the key squares. So here moves like king e3 works. If black takes the pawn, king d5, then the white king will do opposition against the black king, king d3, and control these key squares, making sure that the black king will never be able to step on it. And it's a draw. Okay guys, so that's all for mine squares. Just to summarize the idea, remember that when there are mine squares, you don't want your king to step on it first. You only want to step on your mine squares after the other king has stepped on his mine squares. And then you can step on your mine squares, activating the landmine, so to speak. That's all from me in this video. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.